Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I am Rafe, and today is a great day to be doing a podcast with a very good friend of mine, America's favorite rocket scientist. Bob Luzenski is here with us. Bob, how are you this evening?
Rafe, I'm doing great. And as always, I'm happy to be back here at the Buff virtual studio. And today I'm actually even very much excited to be joining through the magic of my new fiber optic internet connection that was installed today.
Well, you know, technology marches on. Unfortunately, the nature of man stays the same. So we'll see where that takes us. Before we go any further, I need to thank our listeners, Bob, because they are the reason we are a global top 10% podcast. They can reach us as usual at bufnagle.com. Remember, share the love, share the buff, give us a 5-star review, subscribe, hit the like, smiley star, whatever you do there. Whatever you can do on your end to make my life better on this end would be a great thing. Tell a friend to listen and you will get a free episode. And remember, you can hit that little link in the show notes and you can buy me a coffee, which will, I don't know, allow me to get a haircut or something like that. So anyway, hit those buttons.
You don't need a haircut, near as I can tell.
Well, it will happen.
The viewers can't see this, but I sure can.
Well, if it doesn't happen,
you may need a shave, but not a haircut.
Yeah, by Christmas time, Santa will be in my house. So, Bob, last time we talked was not long ago. We talked. We're going to talk about two things tonight, but the first one is very brief. We're going to have a little update on the Starliner. We had there was lots of chagrin about astronauts being stuck on the space station and Starliner. Would it make it back? And what happened? So we're going to have a real brief update on that. And then we're going to talk about one of the world's most astounding engineering triumphs that we witnessed on Sunday, the 13th of October. Was that the day? Yes. So
just a couple of days ago.
So what's the Starliner update?
The update there is that SpaceX launched their lasted crew mission to the International Space Station with one NASA astronaut and one Russian cosmonaut, and and two empty seats. And the two empty seats are for the two astronauts that flew up to the space station on the Starliner. And they are now part of the crew of Crew 9 that is going to spend a tour of duty on the space station and return in February or March.
So all looks good for them. They will get down. They will rejoin their families after a more than it's kind of like a Gilligan's Island kind of thing. It was more than a 3-hour tour, right?
Well, yes, it was supposed to be a few days, and it ended up being about that many months. So and the best part of this is now, instead of their backup, which was to be part of the Crew 8, and they had foam padding instead of seats where they could ride down if they had to. They now have proper seats and proper spacesuits. So,
well, that's good. So,
yep.
NASA seemed to have done the right thing with regard to their astronaut people, and the missions go on, and so all is well that ends well, unless you're trying to design a Starliner, and then we got to figure out how to do thrusters. But software is an issue that we have discussed, and I'm sure we'll discuss.
We're not going to get into that today.
All right. The big thing, though, is on Sunday. If I can, well, how do I say this? Our friends at SpaceX launched a big rocket. It split into two pieces like it was designed to do. And one of the pieces, instead of splashing down in the ocean to be recovered, instead of landing on a barge or in an open field, it made its way back to the launch pad it had left 7 minutes prior, landed itself on a hook, on a gantry crane overstanding the launch pad, and it was a miracle of of great engineering, and it was like watching the first flight at Kitty Hawk. It was an incredible show.
I completely agree. So what we're talking about is the fifth flight of the Starship Super Heavy, which is SpaceX's very large rocket that they intend to use to do quite a few different things, including launching lots of satellites into space at once, or launching very heavy objects into space, or taking crew to places like the moon or Mars. And this is a privately funded rocket, and it's a big rocket. It's the biggest rocket ever flown. It is almost twice the thrust of the Saturn V that took the United States to the moon. And it is over 400 feet tall.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention that because I actually did some research on this, looking this up, because I knew that it was big. It was bigger than the Saturn V. For those, so I have a Saturn V model up there on my shelf. Not the real one, but I have a model up there.
A Lego model.
I do have a Lego model.
A beautiful model.
It's a beautiful model. And it is a scale 363 feet tall, 111 meters. The Starship Super Heavy. Okay, so Super Heavy is the name of the booster rocket, which is the thing that gets
the first stage. Yes.
And then the second thing on top of it is called Starship. So when you put them together, you get, it's like, what do they call it? A compound word, right? You get Starship Super Heavy.
Super Heavy, yes.
And what else would you call it, right? And so the piece that they caught on the crane was the booster part, which is 233 feet tall, 71 meters. That's, okay, so how big is that? That's like 23 stories tall. That's a really big thing. That's bigger than a semi-truck. It's bigger than one of those, what do they call it, land trains in Australia that they drive across. I mean, this was a really big thing. It was moving really fast. They slowed it down and they steered it in and they dropped it onto the little hook. It was remarkable to see.
So you keep referring to a hook, and I'm going to correct you just mildly there.
You're right.
The arms. This is really just different than how anybody's ever done anything. Well, no one's ever done anything like this to start. Let's just start there. And it's very different than you would even think. I mean, it's not the closest thing
to this that I can think of, and this is not very close, but it's the closest thing I can think of, is when you land a fighter jet on an aircraft carrier. There's a hook and a cable, and the hook has to engage the cable, and it stops it very fast.
Yes.
So something grabs something else. So there's this kind of hooking action, but you're right. It's not a hook the way we think of a hook on an aircraft carrier.
It's two mechanical arms that have been dubbed the chopsticks because of their appearance, and the whole thing together. And these two arms ride up and down the sides of the launch tower. And I say that because, it seems it's been around for several years now, but you still just look at it and go, they're doing what? and so this thing rides up and down the sides of the launch tower, and the whole thing together has been lovingly called Mechazilla. So instead of Godzilla catching the rocket, it's Mechazilla catching the rocket, and the whole thing looks incredible. And what's so interesting about this is they intended they're using this both as the crane, if you will, that lifts and stacks the rocket on the launch pad. So this Mechazilla, these arms, the chopsticks, actually serve the purpose of lifting the rocket, the two stages, onto the launch pad. The Super Heavy booster stage gets set on the launch mount, and then the Starship gets rolled up, and it gets picked up by the same arms, and it gets stacked on top of the Super Heavy.
So if I were to mime being Mechazilla, right,
yes.
I would stand up very straight and tall. And this was interesting to me because I kept hearing them about chopsticks. And when in my head I hear chopsticks, I think of them kind of pointing down.
Pointing down, yes.
Right. And that's not really how it is.
No.
At least when it caught the rocket, it wasn't. I have to imagine that I have like my arms pointed almost straight out in front of me, but not really, a little bit broader. So it's kind of at an angle here. So I have it's a triangle. And then as it's coming in, these arms close together to become parallel, right? At, shoulder width apart, like they say. Yep. And parts of the rocket catch on top of my arms is what we do.
There are two small, I don't even know what to call them. They're small things that stick out from the side of the top of the rocket.
Bob. There are words that
I'm sure there's a word for it. I'm just blanking on it. These two little stubby things stick out, and they're like posts, and it lands on those. Those are what lands on Mechazilla, on the arms of Mechazilla, and it's
and I can imagine doing that kind of thing with like a paper towel tube and like a couple toothpicks that I could kind of make that work. This thing caught the rocket. Okay. And I showed this to Michelle, and she was like, how come the crane didn't tip over? I mean, this thing is the super heavy is, what is it, Bob? It's super heavy.
Super heavy.
And it's 23 stories tall. It's 30 feet in diameter, 9 meters in diameter. It is a really big thing that weighs a lot. It's coming down really fast. Okay, well over the speed of sound. It gets slowed down with the rocket propulsion pushing out the bottom. The computers keep this thing vertical somehow, right? And they guide it. They steer it with Bob's steering software. Go to bob.com and get your steering software. And they get the steering software to guide it in between those arms. And then when it gets pretty close, the arms start closing together, and it catches on top of the arms with these little fins at the top, and it hangs there, and the fire kind of peters out, and
the engine shut off, and the fire
ready to go in an hour to launch the next one.
Yeah, and so what's interesting about this is the first mention of SpaceX intending to actually catch the super heavy booster this way was less than 4 years ago. It was 4 years ago, November. And it was basically, hey, Elon Musk posted on what was then Twitter at the time and said, hey, the plan now is to land, is to catch the super heavy booster with the arms. And what's interesting is their original plan, if you go back to the first presentation about this rocket, which was, I think, about 10 years ago, the first plan was, the intention was it was going to land right back on the launch mount. So, which seemed far-fetched at the time. It's less far-fetched now in my mind. But when I saw that when they first presented it, it seemed remarkable. Anyway,
no, they've been landing Falcon 9 rockets on pointy side up, I guess you would call it, right? They've been landing those on barges in the ocean for years now.
And on land.
And
this is where you need to back up. We need to back up a little bit, and we need to give some perspective. So SpaceX's workhorse rocket, which is launching over 100 times this year and launched almost 100 times last year, it was designed to be reused. The first stage to be reused. The second stage is used. Those are only used once, but the first stage was designed to be reused. And the first time they actually successfully landed one of those was in December of 2015. And that was after more than a year of trying.
So that was 9 years ago was the first time they ever landed one upright on its bottom.
Yes, and this was back at on land at Landing Zone 1, which is on the Cape Canaveral, and then 4 months later, in April of 2016, they landed one on a barge. And those were the first 2 successful landings. They have, in that time, since then, they have successfully landed almost 350 first stages.
Now, do we have a ratio here? Like,
I don't have that math, okay. But the idea, and of course, way back when they proposed that they were going to do this, there were all kinds of industry experts saying, "Oh, there's no way they'll ever be able to do that." Then there were industry experts, once they did land, that said, "Oh, well, they'll never be able to make it economical." And now they just don't say anything because they've done it 350 times, because it is economical. I don't remember what the numbers are, but it's like, more than mid tens of millions to build a first stage brand new. And what the last number I heard was it was around 10 million to refurbish one for flight. And it's probably less at this point. So there's no way they're not making money doing this, because they're still selling launches for basically the same price.
Right.
And so it's just, this is important, because prior to that, the biggest rocket that had done a vertical takeoff and vertical landing, it actually started with the DCX project back in the early 90s. And that was McDonnell Douglas had a contract through the Strategic Defense Initiative. And this actually was inspiration for both the Falcon 9 being able to reuse the first stage. It also was inspiration for Blue Origin's New Shepard rocket that does suborbital hops and then comes back down. So that was kind of the beginning of that vertical takeoff, vertical landing, actually doing it. And it took SpaceX in the mid-teens, 20 teens, to actually make it happen. And it didn't happen immediately. There's a wonderful video that they did in 2017, poking fun at themselves, actually. Back when they had only landed a few of them, they put out this video, and you can look and you can find it on SpaceX's YouTube channel. And it's basically how not to land an orbital rocket. And it's set to music that's just whimsical.
I think that's it's a Sousa March. I think it's a John Philip Sousa March.
It's great. It's a wonderful video, and it shows all the different ways it didn't work. And then at the end, it starts showing the ways it did work. And it's well worth the viewers going to find that video and watching it, because
it's 2 minutes and 8 seconds. Yeah. So
it's totally worth it. And so that's where this came from. So that's where you start, SpaceX trying to land their Falcon 9 first stage unsuccessfully multiple times. They went through all this stuff, and then they finally got it right, and they landed one. And then they still had ones that didn't successfully land and blew up and all that afterwards. And then they landed another one, and then they just kept. And the thing that is so important to point out here is that getting back prior to this, any conventional rocket, orbital class rocket, they would launch. The first stage would get the upper stages going, get the upper stage and the payload going, and then it would separate when its fuel ran out, and then it would just come back into the atmosphere and then crash into the ocean. Every single one, until SpaceX did this.
And we're talking hundreds of them, thousands of those rockets.
Yes,
right?
I don't even know what the number is. Prior to SpaceX landing a first stage, how many first stages went into the ocean? Or if you're in China, they land on land and crash into villages. But anyways, I wish I was making that up.
Oh yeah.
And so this thing that they did is, I mean, it's remarkable. And so that's where you have to start. And then from there we can talk about now going forward to what we saw on Sunday.
Right. So, okay. So this is what they did, and they did a phenomenal thing. And I'm thinking, well, how do you do that? Okay. So you are engineering people. You say, let's do this thing. We have a rocket. So what's the? I mean, obviously, I'm sure the most important thing, Bob, is the software.
It's got to be the software. Right? It's always the software.
But so to me, I'm thinking how hard it is, and you did this is what you did, right? This was, you wrote software to help keep cars from doing things that you don't want the cars to do.
Yes, keeping them on the road.
And I've done little Lego robots to try to make them follow a line, and you learn all sorts of things. Become very, your calculus becomes very, it becomes ingrained in you once you start really using it in that kind of context. But just the steering to keep this thing, just to keep a rocket upright as it's launching, is a thing. And now it's going backwards, and the rocket is keeping it from tipping over.
It's just the same as a launch. All you do is reverse time.
It works the same way, even because it's not going.
That's a joke, Rafe. Right? It's a joke.
Okay.
You just turn run time backwards. It's a joke.
Well, you can run time backwards mathematically. Sure, you can.
Yes, that's what I. Anyway.
Minus t. Okay.
So there's a point I want to make before we get into that process. There's one more point that I wanted to make about getting the first stages back. Once you get, instead of pitching it in the ocean, and instead you get the first stage back. Now, what can you do? You can tear the thing apart and see how your design compared with reality. Because prior to that, they all went in the ocean. So you never got them back. So you could never tear them down and see, well, I did this analysis in order to do my design, right? And how close did my analysis go with what actually happened to it? You can take parts and, you do, I did this, I was involved in this in automotive, where you do life testing on parts, right? Because you want to be able to have a car last for, a good long time. And so you do life testing on parts. And I was involved in doing the test equipment to make that happen. But now you can get a part back from the first stage, and you can take it off, and you can do life testing on it now that you've gotten it back and after it's flown, to see how much life it still has left compared to when you tested it when it was brand new. And from there, you can go to, well, I can fly this thing X amount of times before I need to, to take it and do a heavier inspection or replace it. And so that SpaceX has been able to do that with their first stage. And that is what's allowed them to go from, 8 flights in a year to 100 flights in a year, and reusing boosters over 20 times. It's just because they got it back. And
so they get to do the postmortem on the parts and see what happens.
Yes, they get to tear down the first few vehicles, see what happens, and then where there's more material or the design is more robust than it needs to be, you can take stuff out. You can take material out where it's not strong enough, where it isn't going to last, the design life that you want it, 10 or 20 or more flights. You can beef the part up, and they've been able to do this with, they've got almost 350 times they've been able to, do that, go through that cycle and look at what's come back and make design changes to make it more sturdy.
So I keep thinking about how I'm thinking about, the word I want to use is complacency, and I don't think that's quite right, and I'm not even sure you can answer this question. Do you think that do you think anybody there is starting to feel complacent? Like, yeah, we got this nailed. We've done it 350 times. The last time we had a mishap was, I don't know, 31 launches ago, or 12 launches ago, or 150 launches ago, whatever the number is. How do you avoid that mindset from stepping in on this kind of project?
You know, the cost of success, to paraphrase a phrase, the cost of success, or the price of success, is eternal vigilance. And you have to continue. And SpaceX has had a little bit of a streak of small issues. They've had a couple issues with a couple second stages during flight, including even the second stage from Crew 9, not during the part where the Dragon was attached, but afterwards the disposal burn did not go completely to plan, and so but they turned around resolution to that actually very quickly in order to fly two very high value missions, the European Hera science mission before the hurricane cut across Florida, and then the Europa Clipper, which launched yesterday on Monday, yes, and is now heading towards the Jupiter system by way of a flyby around Mars, then around Earth, and picking up the gravitational energy and heading out to eventually out to Jupiter. So they've done that. They've turned it around. But the thing you started to touch on before I went back and talked about this idea of getting the first stage back, the thing I want to touch on is the design process and the idea. And you go back to 4 years ago when they were thinking about, how are we going to do this thing? The goal. Here's the goal, right? They have this Falcon 9 first stage, and they're landing with landing legs, and the landing legs are extra weight, and they're also a part that can fail, and
Right.
And they want, the goal is to do fast turnaround of launches, because one of the operational modes of the Starship flights for flights away from Earth is they need to be refilled with propellant. And so that means tankers need to fly up, and this propellant is cryogenic, and it gets warm, and you want to do these tanker flights as quickly as possible, because the propellant will boil off and you lose propellant. So you're going to lose per day, you're going to lose so much propellant. So the faster you can launch the tankers, the less tankers you end up needing.
Is this some sort of magic organic propellant, or is this something pretty standard like methane?
It's liquid oxygen and liquid methane.
Okay.
So
all right. So it's very, very standard. It's very simple organic chemistry. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
And so your requirements end up being, okay, I want to be able to launch as quick as possible. So I want the service, they basically set out to make launching this big giant rocket as frequent as airliner flights. Okay. And originally the shuttle was supposed to be as frequent as airliner flights. And of course they never was successfully able to do that. But here we are, this is the requirement: be able to fly frequently, to be able to fly without having to do any refurbishment, just turn the vehicle around, gas it up again and go. And so the question is, how do you solve that problem? Those are the requirements. How do you solve that problem? And quite honestly, this is the part of engineering that is my absolute favorite part. Given a set of requirements, how do you solve the problem? What do you do? How do you design a system or a part or a device to meet this set of requirements? How do you solve this problem? And I got very little taste of that in my actual day job. It was always more something I would do at home, in my electronics projects at home. Or I can think of an example. One of the places I worked, you may be familiar, and the listeners may be familiar with the FIRST Robotics first robotics league, and there's also a first Lego league as well. And so the company I work for, the place I work for, sponsored a first robotics team, and they actually had come in first place the year before. And so that, they had a really good team, and the guys that I knew, the guys that did that, I didn't do it myself, but they were friends of mine at work. And so the next year, there's this big day. The big day is when they announce what the new game is for the coming year. That's a big day, and they make a big deal out of it. And so they did that. And then I went out with the guys for lunch after that, after the announcement. And it was just this total nerd fest.
I was just going to say nerd fest.
Oh my gosh. Brainstorming how to solve the problem. You're given a set of requirements, a set of rules, and how do you solve the problem? How do you create a robot to do the game, to play the game and win? Because that's what you're trying to do. And that is absolutely the most fun thing in my mind in engineering. I mean, then there's the part about actually grinding it out to make it work, but that part where you're doing the brainstorming, and it's an inherently social activity. It's nowhere near as fun if you're just doing it yourself.
Right. Well, when you get to an answer, you want to call somebody and you want to say, "Hey, look what I just figured out."
Well, here's the thing: I can get to an answer. I can by myself. I can be presented with the problem and the requirements and the rules, and get to an answer. But the thing is that answer isn't going to be as good as the answer where you get a bunch of smart people in the room and you go around and each person can contribute and make the idea better. And so you think about SpaceX doing this, and the smart people at SpaceX, given this set of requirements that they want to launch this big rocket fast, frequently and turn it around quickly, and not have to refurbish it every time. And it must have been just amazing. I would have loved to have been part of those discussions. I would not have just wanted to be a fly on the wall. I would have wanted to be at the table being part of that conversation, because that was just amazing. And what they came up with was the chopsticks and Mechazilla. I mean, it's amazing. It really is.
And you kind of think of how did that idea come in? I mean, I'm sure people there can tell us, right? Well, we first of all had this idea, and somebody had this idea, and somebody said, let's put a big net out there, and somebody said we should do, but you can see how those things morph with the right people in the room, with the right mindset, right?
And the right culture for brainstorming, because brainstorming is not a exercise where you want to get your idea to the top. It is not. It's you want to help the whole team get to the top.
Right. And and it doesn't really matter who scores the touchdown. The whole team wins, right?
And yes, and it doesn't matter whose idea. It's because everybody's contributing. And that's a fundamental of brainstorming.
And I've been on teams that have done that. And it is like you said, it is the most energizing intellectual activity you can take part in. I think
I agree. I thoroughly enjoy it.
But I've also been on teams that have been assigned that, and when it fails, the biggest thing that shows up for me when it fails is somebody says, "Well, that's never going to work, and here's why."
Yes,
because it takes a tentacle that might have something down at the end of the line, and they stop it before you even get a chance to do something bizarre and we'll catch it on a crane. That'll never work. And then there's every idea about having moving. It's gone.
It just evaporates it's like a soap bubble that someone pops, and it's this beautiful, colorful thing that we know is colorful because of how thin it is compared to the wavelength of light.
Yes, we've had discussions of that, Bob, on this
that's
this
why
very show.
That's a reference. I was making a subtle reference, but you made it less subtle.
Yes, I did.
um, and taking that soap bubble, that beautiful soap bubble, and popping it. That's what that is.
Yeah.
And that's why it has no place in proper brainstorming.
Well, and proper problem solving, because those are similar activities. All right, so we promised we wouldn't do this when we were doing pre-show notes, but there was another piece of that rocket.
Okay. Yes. So I wanted to focus more on the idea because of what this brings out to me. This thing that was done engineering wise is astonishing. I can't even come up with the right superlative to use for it. And watching it, you just watch it and go, I just can't believe they did that. And then we watch it, and you and I were messaging back and forth that morning and going, did you see that? That's unfriggin' believable. I mean, it's just, and it was, but they did it. And it is amazing. And I just wanted people to have a little bit of perspective there. But yes, there were two parts to this thing. The other part that was amazing was the Super Heavy booster actually lofted the Starship part, the second stage, on its way, which it then continued and arced more than halfway around the world to then do another test of its heat shield to try and re-enter. And so that was amazing to watch, because the Starship has, normally during reentry, and we've talked about this before, most spacecraft come through, that do reenter are small enough that a sheath of, when they reenter, the friction with the upper atmosphere causes a sheath of plasma, which is a state of matter now, and you can look it up.
And you can see it.
Yes. And that plasma is not conducive to having radio waves go through it. And it acts kind of like a metal shield, except it's not metal, and it keeps radio waves coming out. So, but the Starship is so big, it leaves a big enough wake as it enters the atmosphere that radio waves can get out upwards along its path. And so SpaceX has put Starlink, their satellite internet constellation, they put Starlink antennas on the back of it. And we were able to watch the entire reentry of this Starship on Flight 5. And unlike Flight 4, where the heat shield actually failed in several places, but that Starship just kept on going until it got all the way down. This one did much better. They completely stripped the heat shield off of it between Flight 4 and Flight 5. They took the heat shield that they had on this Starship for Flight 5, and they completely stripped it off and redid it with more protection, so that if they did lose a tile, or if they did have some burn through that, and they reinforced around the flaps so that they could make it through the atmosphere, and make it through the atmosphere they did, and they made it through completely under control. They did the landing burn for the Starship vehicle, and we know that it was a pinpoint landing exactly where they wanted it to, because they had buoys out there in the Indian Ocean with cameras, and we got to see it. There was no film involved, but kind of like we don't dial the phone. We don't dial the phone either.
Yes, that's right.
But it came down where the camera on the buoy was looking. And so that's actually important, because not only does SpaceX want to catch the Super Heavy first stage, they want to catch the Starship as well when it comes back. So being able to make a pinpoint landing of the Starship on this flight is a precursor to them being able to do the same catch with the Starship, which is a precursor to them then moving forward and quickly being able to launch these vehicles.
Wow, it was a wonderful thing to see. When I saw the Super Heavy getting close to does that even have a name? I wanted to call it a gantry crane, but it's probably not. The launch tower, right?
The
When it was
launch
getting
tower.
close to the launch tower, you could see it was kind of like it was steering. The computers are driving it, right? I mean, so it's trying to get. It's not like a guy with a joystick.
Software
right?
is driving it, right?
The software is driving it, and software's running on the computers that are okay. And when it got it, but it would be easy to imagine that thing just a little bit off, bumping into the tower, bending it, knocking it over.
There were even some angles some camera angles where it looked like it was going to hit the tower.
Right.
And I know when it did that swing to slow its horizontal motion towards the tower down, it's got to swing. It's got to actually swing towards the tower to slow itself down in that direction. And I'm thinking, oh, here we go. This is it. And it didn't. And then it swung back vertical and nestled into the arms. It just snugly nestled into
if a 71
the arms
meter
of
tall rocket
Mechazilla.
can snuggle. That's what it just did.
It is what it did. And there was a camera angle that I saw from the tower.
Yep.
Looking straight down the arms of Mechazilla, and it looked surreal because it was so gentle. This giant 71 meter tall thing, 9 meters across, it just gently sets down like it was nothing.
And then there was one last little poof out the bottom of the engine shut down. And what was interesting to me, they were like, hey, we're all shut down, and everybody's exploding in cheers and people are crying and doing all this stuff. And there's a little bit of, part of the bottom of the rocket's kind of on fire a little bit. And there's little pieces.
Yeah, there was some flames coming out of one of the quick disconnect vents. It would have been the methane vent.
Yeah. But it just was, to me, it was such a, well, we did it. Now let's try to make sure we can do it again, right? And so it's the only problem with something like this is you're not sure how close you were to the edge of failure, right? Had it failed in a certain place, you're across the line. Right now with them landing it in there, it worked. That's great. So can we do it when it's windy? Can we do it when it's
right? All of that, because the conditions were darn near perfect for that launch.
It was beautiful.
And so the thing I can say there, though, relative to that, is they have already lowered it down and rolled it back to the factory. And that the next step is they're going to tear that baby down.
Yep.
They're gonna pull the pieces off, and they're going to see how close they were, and that is just going to make the next ones better and better and better, like they did with Falcon 9.
Well, you talked about the camera angle from the top of the tower, watching that thing, or looking down the arms of the tower. My favorite shot of that entire liftoff sequence was one with the sunrise just peeking above the horizon. And I thought, oh, that's east. And the rocket, as it's going up, you can see it's turning.
It's starting to turn
toward the sun.
Already.
And it was like, of course, that's where it's going. They all go to the east because they go faster that way, right?
Because they already have a head start.
Right.
The Earth's rotational speed is already spinning them, moving them in that direction.
So you get a boost. And I thought, well, there it goes. It's doing. I thought that to me was the picture. First of all, with the sun on the horizon and the rocket, but then when you saw it start to tilt and drive in, I'm doing it right toward you, Bob. My hand is
I can see that. The viewers can't, but
but they can imagine. They can imagine.
Yeah, they can imagine.
It was a beautiful shot. So if you get a chance, just go to the SpaceX website and look that stuff up. It was great fun, and I enjoyed. I'm very glad you alerted me the day before, because I had whiffed on that one. I knew it was coming, but I didn't realize it was going to be that soon. I had spent the day putting in a new floor.
Oh boy,
that's a long story. But
yes, I'm sure.
It was a wonderful thing. And so what's next? They have another one planned, I would assume, coming up. And some more.
It's hard to know just yet. They haven't come right out and said. The FAA actually gave them a license for both Flight 5 and Flight 6. on Saturday.
Whoa. Okay.
So it's hard to know whether they'll fly another one just like this, which they could do, or whether they'll seek an adjustment to the license because they want to try something else.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see what they do next. And I'm sure I'll be back to report on that.
And we will be glad to have you aboard, Bob. Thanks again. It's all, like I said, it's always a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, it is. Thank you for having me.
And the rest of you, you know the shtick. Seek the good, live virtuously, and flourish, and you will enjoy the adventure of life.
It's going to be a great day.